is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Grace of Kings, chapters 40, 41, and 42, brought to you by Kyle. In these chapters, we find out about where Jin comes from, and how her mind works, and how she has grown, and how good Kuni is at spotting talent, but also spotting the talent of the people around him for spotting talent. It's an inception of talent. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. These three chapters are really gratifying because I feel like we've had a lot of things being like set up with people being really smart or people seeming to get a break and then it all falls apart. And don't get me wrong, I don't have any illusions that things are not going to continue to fall apart for some people, but these three chapters are solely building up. So I'm enjoying what I can while I can, in other words. But yeah, this chapter 40 is all about Jin. And it starts off with, no one ever called her Jintika. And this is something that I mentioned before about how the kids, like Kuni and Jia's children, both like all of their names end in Tika, but Tika is italicized and the rest of their name is not. So I figured that this meant something, and apparently it's like a form of endearment for a young child, or just a what's the word I want? An indicator at the very least that this is a child, and somebody who's cared for. And Jin, it starts off with no one ever called her Jintika because nobody loved her. Nobody cared about her. Nobody even saw her as a child. They saw her as a potential commodity that they were impatient to exploit, pretty much. So she was born to a prostitute, and the prostitute died giving birth to her. So she didn't even have her own mother's protection growing up where she did. And in the whorehouse, she did all of the like menial labor, and she would be beaten all the time for either being too slow at doing what she needed doing, or if she did it fast and then tried to like relax, she would get beaten for that as well. When she was 12, she overheard the madam speak of auctioning off her virginity. During the night, she cut her way out of the closet that the madam locked her in, took all the money that was in the house, and escaped into the streets of Dimushi. The money didn't last long, and she was faced with a choice, to which I'm like, I feel her. I heard this part, that she escaped and she took all this money, and I'm feeling very hopeful. And then, of course the money didn't last long. Like, there are so many reasons why it could not. Maybe there wasn't that much money to begin with. Maybe people saw that she was a child and tried to take advantage of her. A child is also just not expected to be smart about using money. But I had just really sort of been like, oh, you stole all the money in the house. That'll get you a good ways. And I was like, why do I think this? And because she's only 12 years old at this point, And I'm not even going to address the like horror of somebody being like, why don't we auction off her virginity now that she's 12 and ready for it? Because we all know the realities of the situation. So I'm not going to talk about it, but it's ugly and horrible. So there is a gang of thieves that winds up taking her in, and the leader is named Grey Weasel. And Grey Weasel is conscious of the fact that she is smart and small, and that she, being a girl, will be non-threatening to a lot of people, and that therefore she will be able to get away with more and fool people more and be better at thieving specifically, which will come up later. So he teaches her how to do the like pickpocketing and everything, and also how to fight, because I really liked this detail, she isn't able to just get into a brawl or posture and like intimidate anyone. She's too small and she's female. It will not work that way for her. So she has to learn a way of fighting in which she like pretends to be helpless and then strikes suddenly without warning and with incredible force and precision to get her out as quickly as possible. In other words, she can't prolong it because she will lose. So if she can get somebody in a really tender area and do it in a flash where they're not expecting it or seeing it coming, she will be able to get out of the situation. But she has to be super careful about it, and she has to be convincing at being helpless at first. So, this whole thing is like seems to be working out for her pretty well until they wind up taking a caravan. And in the caravan, there is a carriage that has about a dozen boys and girls in it. All of them are no older than 6 years old. And they take the kids back to the camp and feed them and everything, like their little hideaway. And she is able to calm them down and sort of, make them feel at home. And is feeling pretty good about that. And Grey Weasel says something about how she's good with them. And she seems to think that, like, they're going to be returning these children to where they were taken from. And when she wakes up in the morning, she wakes up to the sound of children screaming. And I'm going to read this to you because it's awful. But I have to read it because it's told in such a blunt way that it really was effective. In the backyard, a few of the children lay on the ground crying. One had a bloody bandage wrapped around his right shoulder, his arm gone. Another sat with gauze wrapped around her head, 2 spreading red stains marking where her eyes had been. A third had lost his feet, and he crawled slowly, trailing blood on the grass. The other children, still uninjured, were held by members of the gang against the back wall. They screamed and kicked and bit, but the men stood as still as statues, not loosening their iron grasp. In the middle of the backyard was a stump used for splitting firewood. A girl was tied to it, her left arm laying across the stump. She was so frightened that her voice no longer sounded human, but like the cries of some wild animal. Grey Weasel stood next to the stump, a bloody axe dangling from his hand. His expression was as calm as his voice, as though this was the most routine of mornings. "It won't hurt for very long, I promise. I'll just take off your arm from the elbow down. People can't resist giving money to a pretty maimed little beggar girl." Jin ran up to him. "What are you doing?" "What does it look like?" "Making enhancements. I'll drop them off around the city every morning and collect them in the evening. They'll bring in a lot of money from begging. Compassion can be a valuable thing to steal, too." Jin moved to stand between him and the girl. "You never did anything like this to me." "I thought I saw in you the potential of becoming a good thief." Grey Weasel's eyes narrowed. "Don't let me regret my decision." So she suggests sending them back. And he's like, "To where? They're children who can't give directions to where they were stolen from. And for all we know, their parents willingly sold them and won't want them back. No, and secondly, if we just let them go and put them out into the world, somebody else will inevitably scoop them up and capitalize on them when I could have capitalized on them. And I'm not going to let somebody else steal a resource." And this is one of those things that, like, I know to be true. This is still a thing that exists in the world. And it's, like, so disturbing and so horrifying that it's really difficult for me to think about it without getting physically nauseous. But, I mean, I'm pretty sure this was in that movie Slumdog Millionaire. Did anybody see that movie? It was so huge when it came out, and then it's like nobody ever talked about it again. But yeah, I mean, using crippled children and crippling them yourself in order to, I guess, pimp them out Like, they're not actually being used for sex, but it's a similar, like, exploitation of their body. It's just so awful because when they save these kids, there's a feeling of, like, we did something decent and good, weirdly, by accident, but we did it. And then it turns out that landing in the lap of these people is worse, probably, than where they would have wound up. Maybe not, but I feel like it is. And yeah, she, like, everybody one by one is maimed in a variety of different ways. And Jin waits until the evening when everybody has fallen asleep, and she goes to Grey Weasel and she stabs him in the fucking head. She stabs him through the eye and then into the soft spot under the lump in his throat. And then just runs. And it says that was the first man she ever killed. Being on her own made it much harder. She had to avoid the gang of thieves who had let it be known that they were looking for her. She hid in the basements of old temples and only came out when she had to eat. A couple caught her trying to cut the purse of the wife in the markets one evening, but the husband, a devout follower of Rufiso, decided that rather than turning the young thief into the constables, he would perform a good deed. They would take the young girl in and try to give her a home. But the reality of raising a street urchin and rehabilitating a young criminal was far different from how the man had envisioned it. Jin did not trust the couple and tried to escape. They shackled her and read her sacred texts with her meals, hoping that it would open her mind and heart and that she would repent. But she cursed at them and spat in their eyes. So they beat her, proclaiming that it was for her own good, because evil had gotten into her heart and pain was necessary to pry open her heart to Rufiso. Finally, the couple tired of their experiment in charity. They took her from their house, blindfolded her, and pushed her off their carriage in the countryside far away from Dimushi and far away from their home. During her stay with them, they had shaved her head to cure her of her vanity, they said, and dressed her in plain cotton rags that hid her young, lithe figure to cure her of her lust, they said. Jin was mistaken at first as a boy by those she encountered, and she found that there were advantages to pretending to be a boy. By looking tough as a boy, and by prominently displaying on her belt a short sword that she stole from a hunting lodge, she could avoid a great deal of unpleasant attention. So, I just want to mention how much I love that nod to, like, these people who try and be a savior to her because they think that she needs them so badly. And don't get me wrong, I think that she did need them so badly. But I should rephrase that. She needed someone so badly. But these people obviously did not know what they were doing and expected a miracle to happen, that she would somehow, like, turn the corner and become this perfect little doll for them. And this is the kind of thing that I have heard of with a lot of, like, foster parenting. You hear both sides of it. You hear kids that go into homes in which they are abused, or in which they are exploited, sometimes for, like, labor. Like, they're brought into a house and the parents are given a stipend to care for them, but the kid is used as, like, a housekeeper or, like, to work the farm at times if people have property, things like this. And it's one of those, like, ugly points of view that you see where people are like, well, I wasn't given anything for free when I was a kid and you don't get anything for free either. And it's like, they're a child. What are you talking about? Shut up. And then there are the people who adopt a child, and become foster parents because they think that they will be able to save a child from going down a bad path. And they find out pretty quickly that when a child has been brought up in a certain way and has learned not to trust the world, to not trust people, to not believe that good things just happen, that you can get saved, they are not going to be receptive to your bullshit. And you might not mean it to be bullshit, and you can be as, like, sincere about it as you want. But that's the world they live in, and it is very real. And to behave as if they are just mistaken and that they should know you're not like that is just wishful thinking. That's not how psychology works. That's not how conditioning works. And I have like met more than one person who attempted to foster parent and realized pretty quickly it was not for them, because the kids were coming to them so damaged that it was like not only impossible to like relate to them and get them to want to be part of society and go to school and do work and talk to human beings like people, but also that it was damaging them, they and their own mental health. Because sometimes there was one case of a friend of mine, they adopted a little girl who was clearly like, there was something mentally wrong with her in terms of being maybe psychotic or sociopathic. And this little girl was like bullying other kids in ways that were really cruel and like specific. And then was fabricating these wild lies about the abuse and the, like, being trafficked by and I knew these people, this was not happening, and they would catch her in lies all the time, and she never backed down. And it became this sort of thing where like they wound up under investigation. She was like taken away from them finally, and they were blacklisted. Like they weren't able to adopt any other kids, and foster them. And in the end, they were just kind of like, good, you know, like we really thought that we were going to be able to handle this. And we were so unprepared for what we were taking on. And it's just, you know, they're like, if you've reached a certain age and have always had to look out for yourself and have always had to exploit whatever opportunities you've been presented with to like the maximum, because you'd never know when the next opportunity will present itself, you are going to become the kind of person who preys on other people. That's just going to be an inevitability. And this is like something that winds up turning around for her. But if she hadn't been able to masquerade as a boy, I don't know that it could have turned around for her, because she would have been so vulnerable and at an age finally where she could be trafficked even more effectively. And it's just really lucky in a lot of ways that she was adopted by these people who, while they could not cope with her, cut her hair off and gave her the opportunity to hide in plain sight the way that they did. So she winds up getting sort of taken in by when I say taken in, all I mean is fed. The laundry woman doesn't have a house that she brings Jin to. She doesn't like, sit with her and read to her or anything. She just feeds her, and Jin hasn't eaten in days and is so glad that this woman is consistently bringing her food, and says, "I will repay your kindness 100-fold." The old woman spat on the ground. "You foolish child, you think I share my food with you because I expect a reward? I do it only because I think you are a sorry sight, and Tututika said all living things have a right to food. I would do no different for a stray dog or cat. I feed you so that you don't have to steal. A man who steals is a man who has lost all hope, and you're too young to have no hope." Jin cried for the first time that she could remember when she heard this speech, and she refused to get up from her knees for many hours, no matter how much the old woman coaxed her. The next day, Jin did not go back to the Liru River. She made her way back to the port of Dimushi, where the docks were perpetually busy. There, she found work as an errand boy for the dockmaster and shipping companies. Her thieving days were over. So she keeps working for these people, but she keeps pretending to be a boy. Except it turns out that the dockmaster is onto her charade. He knows that she's a girl, and he's just not saying anything about it. And I suspected that he did because of some of the things that he said to her before there's the big reveal that he knew the whole time. But I really like the fact that he's not fooled, and he doesn't care. He's teaching her the way he would teach a boy because it doesn't matter to him. She's just somebody, like, she winds up becoming pretty good at sword fighting, but makes sure to rely on a reputation of being really good at it so that she doesn't have to fight as often as she might otherwise. But it is really difficult for her to keep her temper under control. She has a tendency to see slights and insults where there aren't any. And later on, she's playing this game with the Dockmaster, because she is able to show him like that she's really good at what I call like 3-dimensional thinking or spatial relations. This is something that I'm also really good at, and if you are super good at like Tetris or something, I feel like that's like a small indicator that you're probably good at this. It's basically being able to tell how things fit together physically and where things will work, and it's a skill that is required for a number of different professions, but it comes in handy in many of them. And obviously in shipping, it's just a very basic, like, we want to get as much in the hold of this ship as we can. And she turns out to be so good at that this dude is like, hey, maybe you should play some games because I feel like you'd be pretty good at them. And it also sort of exercises your brain. And I really enjoy this. He says, you play well, but you're impatient. Why do you immediately challenge me on every move, attacking before you have uncovered my real weakness? Why do you fight tenaciously for every tiny open space before you to the neglect of the larger prize of a dominant board position? Jin shrugged. You play Koopa like you strut around the docks, as if you can't bear to be considered weak for even a moment. You play like you have something to prove. Jin avoided the Dockmaster's eyes. Because I'm small, everyone has always acted as if they can push me around. I can't afford to appear soft. The Dockmaster's voice took on a stern tone. You dream of someday standing tall before men who are bigger than you, but you have not learned to bide your time. If you insist on fighting every fight that comes your way, you're simply letting them push you around in a different way. You will die young and foolish. Jin sat still, thinking. Then she nodded. After 2 weeks, Jin started winning against the Dockmaster. And this was something that I loved. It was just like, if you do this, you're letting them push you around in a different way. I think that's a really important way to look at things. And it's something that I have started to like come to terms with in my own life. Especially like going to therapy. She'll ask me like, why do I want to do something? And oftentimes I'll notice that I'll cite, I want to do this because I've heard that it's a good idea from here and here. And finally she'll just bring it down to like, but what do you want though? Forget what people are thinking about your decisions. What do you think about your decision? And is this what you want? Is this a goal that's actually important to you outside of the context of everybody else? So she winds up being really good at this game and playing things slowly. And eventually some guy comes up to her and tries to challenge her to fighting. And he says that either she fights him or she should crawl between his legs, which is apparently something that's like just done. I thought at first that this was a specific thing that he picked out as like, if you don't, then this is what you're going to have to do. But it says for a man of Jafika, crawling between another man's legs was a humiliation that could not be borne. Other men on the dock soon surrounded the pair, anticipating a show. And Jin looks at him and thinks about the fact that she could easily beat him. She knows that she could easily beat him. But if she does this, she'll kill him. And if she kills him, she'll have to fucking start all over again. Like, she started to build something here. And you can't, like, this, you know, as much as this place is, like, a little bit wild and lawless, murdering somebody on the dock is not exactly going to be overlooked. So she would not be able to finish learning how to read from the Dockmaster. Oh, and that's one of the things that the Dockmaster, he says, I'm going to teach you how to read because my sister was taken advantage of by somebody because she signed a contract that she couldn't read. And when he said it that way, my sister was taken advantage of, I was like, you know that she's a girl. Like, you're mentioning that because of the fact that you can tell. And that's not necessarily true, but that's just what I thought. And it turned out to be true that he did know. But Jin decides that she's just going to go ahead and crawl through his legs and deal with the fucking, humiliation of it. The crowd booed, the man laughed, and Jin felt her ears grow red. A darkness rose in her heart, urging her to unsheath her sword and plunge it into the soft belly of the man standing over her, but she forced the darkness down. So yeah, I, like, on the one hand, I'm like, oh, I wish that you had just fought him and maybe not killed him and just fought him. But he doesn't seem like the kind of person that you get to just fight and walk away from. He would find a way to kill her if she beat him. So then the rebellion comes, and it sort of like ruins her plans because, you know, the way that trading and everything is working out is not going to employ her the way that she had been planning on. So she had, you know, she's in danger of getting pressed to serve in the Navy if she stays there. So she bails and becomes a bandit, which, you know, as you do. After a while, she found that she had a knack for leading men. Limited by her small frame, she was not a great fighter on the field, but she was careful and calculating, and men who followed her won many victories in surprising ways. Yet, because she was so unimposing physically, men attributed the success of her plans to luck rather than skill. She was forever being brushed aside when the bandits struggled for power. So, yeah, I kept thinking she's brushed aside because she's a woman, but nobody knows that yet. And finally, commanders assumed she couldn't know anything about military strategy because she didn't kill many men with her own hands. Even the great Marshal Zindu, whose gambit at Wolf's Paw she greatly admired, did not give her a chance. She had bribed the guards to give her an audience with him and presented a strategy for how to quickly eliminate the Empire's last bits of resistance in Gejira without killing many more people. But Marshal Zindu had called her ideas dishonorable. And I'm really curious. I feel like we read something from Mata's perspective about specifically the suggestion that he was given and that he decided not to do that. But I don't remember exactly what it was. I feel like she suggested dressing up a lot of people in civilian clothing, but I might be thinking of somebody else. So Jin decides to go off with Kuni to Dasu. And when she follows to Dasu, she intends to find a way to speak to him one-on-one. But she keeps on running into roadblocks with that. And finally, she's like drunk one night and just gets so upset that she smashes up all the tables in this restaurant. And she winds up being imprisoned and scheduled to a public flogging. She's in the middle of being flogged and stops Kogoyelu, who is walking past. Does King Kuni want a great warrior? The man being punished shouted at him. Kogoyelu stopped and looked at the man tied to the post. He was in his undershirt only, and the uniform at his feet told Kogo that the man was a lowly corporal. You do not look like a great warrior. A man who can kill several people with a sword is merely a living weapon. A great warrior can kill thousands of men with just his mind. Kogo was intrigued. He ordered the prisoner, a man by the name of Mazotti, released. So that is how Kogo comes across her, still not knowing that she is a she. And they go back to his home, and he has a board out. And I'm going to talk about this as if it's chess, even though it's clearly not. But there is a game out that is in a famous pattern that represents the ending of a legendary game between two really good players. And it's taken for granted by practically everyone that this game ended in a way that could not possibly have gone any other way. The person who lost gave up at the appropriate time when there was no coming back. But Jin sees this and is like, oh yeah, they could have fixed this. They could have gotten out of this. And Kogo is very curious because it's just so taken for granted by everyone that this is the end of the game, that he's like, all right, you can get out of this, show me. So they sit down to play, and at first it looks like Kogo is winning, and that Jin is making a lot of really weird mistakes that don't actually that aren't going to be enough of a threat to worry about. So Kogo is still focusing on the center of the board and deciding to sort of ignore these weird little side plays that she's making. And then gradually starts to realize that she has set things up so that she can connect them. And he has focused so long on the center that the outside is too far gone for him to fix and get in there and undo what she has done. So basically she winds up being able to win the game despite this wildly famous ending that everyone else has just accepted. She is able to come up out of that and win. And this is what makes Kogo stop and be like, all right, no, you know what? We are going to go see Kuni right now. This is nonsense. So then we go to chapter 41 where we come to the present, and Kuni is meeting Jin and getting told that Jin is a woman. And Jin sort of tests him here. First, Kuni pours the tea for her, which is, it's a submissive moment that she finds very touching, that he is the king and he is a man and he is serving her. And she pushes him a little bit further and asks, what position will you give me? Kuni says, how many soldiers can you lead? And she responds, if you give me 10 men, I can make them fight like 50. If you give me 100 men, I can make them fight like 1,000. If you give me 1,000 men, I can conquer Rui in 5 days. Kuniguru hesitated. There was a thin line between arrogant delusion and genius, and he was inclined to think that this madwoman was closer to the former. But Kogo Yelu had never been wrong, and Kuni had learned to listen to the counsel of those he trusted. I really love this, that Kuni is aware that some people may overstate their own ability, but he has somebody on his staff that he trusts. And so rather than rely on his own understanding or impulses or whatever, he is able to take the advice of someone else and admit that he may not know what's best, and goes ahead and gives her martial, which is fucking unheard of. She's shocked that he does this for her, and is like, all right, there's the evidence I was looking for that he really is different. So she says, I can't match Mata on the battlefield in single combat, and I'll never be able to repeat his feat of daring in the air over Zudi. Yet Mata Zindu is impulsive, emotional, and relies on brute valor rather than sound tactics. He has no understanding of the art of drawing power from men's hearts, politics. He can shed tears when a prized horse dies, yet he doesn't understand how forcefully requisitioning provisions from the peasantry weakens his support. Which I really like that she's just like, how does he have more compassion for animals than people? Which, y'all, if that isn't just the world today. Don't get me wrong. I understand there is this easy, animals are completely innocent. They don't have personalities, and they don't have the kind of sin that we associate with people. But it's still really gross how much more up in arms people get about, for example, an animal at the zoo being killed because it escaped than they do about a human being being shot in the street by police. So I feel like she's really putting her finger on something more there. And then she says one of my favorite lines in this whole book. He is like a crossbow bolt near the end of its flight, seeming strength, disguising terminal fall. Y'all, if that isn't a word, I love that so much. Ugh, that got to me. I read that. I fucking highlighted that shit. I was just like, I love this. I hope she's right. So they wind up working together for quite a while and theorizing about everything. And finally, Kuni introduces her to the army. And of course, everybody initially is just like, are you fucking kidding me with this? She's a woman. What are you doing, dude? And I like how she handles this. First thing is, she says to all of them, the world will be as confused as you when they see me, and in their confusion we will strike them down. Kindo Morana is over here cackling to himself at what a stupid move this is, so we don't have to worry about Kindo, because he's not going to be paying attention. And Jin has a meeting with Mun Kakri and Than Karukono, and straight up says, listen, I know that you guys don't like that I have been put in this spot. I am above the two of you, and you're resentful of it. And she finally says, the reason that I'm so perfect for this position is because I'm a woman. A woman is often weaker than a man physically, and that means she must use different sets of techniques. She must turn her strength against him, let him defeat himself by overexertion, throw him off balance. She must not be ashamed to benefit from every advantage available to her and break the rules of warfare established by men. Dasu is far weaker than the other Tiro states, yet our king dreams of victory and of one day perhaps ascending to the imperial throne. It seems to me that being a woman, I may have a better sense of the hard decisions that must be made to bring about Dasu's rise from its present weakness. I cannot inspire the soldiers by my personal valor and deeds of strength, so I need your support and faith to put my plan into action. And here comes one of my favorite things. History books are full of examples of young commanders establishing their authority with the common soldier through terror and discipline. They would put the troops through some silly exercise and then flog or behead those judged insolent. Yet, because I'm a woman, if I were to do this, I would be called a petty castrating harpy, a shrew in need of a man's firm hand. Instead of respect, I would only create resentment. Such is the way of the world. So I will need your ideas and help, gentlemen, on earning the hearts of our soldiers. So I love this because that's so true. As much as women wish we could, like, this is part of why I've always had a huge issue with that lean in theory of like dealing with business. The theory behind the lean in movement is men get punished for the things, or women get punished for doing the things that men are rewarded for doing. But those things work, and if you push it and decide that you're just going to allow people to see you as a bitch and not care and continue to push it, you will eventually succeed and get where you want to go despite the fact. And the truth of the matter is that that is a politically stupid move. Women acting like, well, yeah, people don't like it, but they'll deal with it, is simply not how it works. People don't like it, and those people are in power, and those people can slap you down if they don't like it. Leaning in and trying to behave exactly like a man, if you are a woman, may work if it's like, you know, a certain circumstance, but it's not something that's going to simply be accepted, and it's certainly not something that is without consequences, and that you can sort of just steamroll over. And that's the thing that I just always disliked the idea of. When it comes down to it, if women acted more like men, they'd be more successful. Women are socialized differently, and everyone is socialized to perceive us differently. So simply encouraging us to behave like men is foolish, and trying to pretend certain things don't exist. And it's also demeaning to our femininity and the things that we have learned from the socialization that we have endured. And there's plenty that we can take advantage of, that we have learned about how to weaponize the position that we're in. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I love that she's just like, yeah, I'm not going to just be like a dude. And I know that if I were like a dude, y'all wouldn't like that and you wouldn't respect it anyway. So I have to figure out a whole nother way to do this. And you all know that as well as I do. So we're all going to need to work on this together. And it was just really, I really enjoyed this. This is not simply, like, she is a woman who knows how to fight. She is a woman who is not interested in the trappings of femininity of this era. But she's also not simply a woman pretending to be a man in the way of her attitude, you know, like she's physically has been pretending to be a man. Yes. But that's for her safety. You know, that isn't because she thinks that being a man is a superior experience to being a woman. She's doing what's practical and smart for her, but it's not coming from an internalized misogyny, which is a really difficult line to draw. It's something that I feel like can happen with a lot of, like, you know, it's something that, for example, I always see when people talk about the, like, liking Arya or Sansa better. And everybody prefers Arya because she's very aggressive and she says what's on her mind and she is a talented fighter and all of that. And that's valid. But Sansa is a survivor and is smart in her own way and is learning to take advantage of her femininity as a weapon and as an advantage. And people aren't as comfortable with that because they can't quantify it the same way because it's not given the respect that a sword fight is given. And it can be really hard as a woman to see that and to understand that when it comes down to it, even if you are successful, if you didn't get to your success the same way as a man did, people will still try and undermine where that success came from and act like it's not yours. And that it was luck, you know, which happened to her even when people believed that she was a man. Imagine how much worse it would be if they knew she was a woman. So they decide to change the whole way that they're training. They had been doing like marching exercises and she's just like, there's no fucking point to this. You aren't marching when you're at war. This does not give you any sort of benefit in battle at all. Like, why are we even doing this? So they start to set up all of these other drills where they're just like basically mimicking battles and their weapons are wrapped in like burlap so as to not hurt each other. But it's not it's other than that, completely identical. They're still meant to like sort of go at each other with these blunted weapons and they're still in the formations that they would be. And there's just like moments where she sends them off on raids because there's pirates and stuff. And it's a test of their learning how to organize and their tactics. And it's also a motivation because they get to keep whatever they take back from the pirates as a reward. So people start to emerge as being better with tactics and being smarter about the way that they fight. And those are the people that she elevates. So let's see. Oh, and then there's this thing where Kuni starts to like bring in people he's sort of like adopting soldiers and fighters who have been rejected by other armies because they are injured already. There are some of them who have lost arms or feet or whatever. And because of these injuries, they are deemed as no longer useful and are rejected, even though they want to fight. And he comes to her with this and expects her to kind of push back a little bit. But she's like, no, like they have a different kind of experience. That doesn't mean they're not useful. And even though it's like a long and expensive process, goes through with all of these different people and gets custom made devices so that they are able to fight the way that they used to, you know, get like basically prosthetics, and put them to use in the army still because that is what these people want. And I really enjoy that. So finally, Lady Rosanna comes to see her. Allow me to take a sip of water before I talk about this excellent part. So, Lady Rosanna, Kuni's new wife, comes to talk to Jin and says that we could make use of women. And Jin is like, well, I mean, we're going to. There's always camp followers and stuff. And Rosanna's like, no, not like that. And Jin regarded her coolly. Few women have the strength to draw a standard bow or wield a 5-pound sword effectively. What would be the point? Instead of answering her, Rosanna walked over to the corner of Jin's room where a bamboo flagpole leaned against the wall. She took the pole and laid it across the gap between Jin's desk and the windowsill. Then she leapt onto the pole, as graceful as a siskin alighting on a branch, which I assume is a bird. She twirled in place on the tips of her feet. The slender bamboo pole barely dipped. Lightness can be an advantage, said Rosanna, especially if you need to be in the air. A fog seemed to dissipate from Mazadi's vision. She imagined slender frames and lighter bodies on battle kites that soared higher, on balloons that stayed aloft longer, on airships that sailed farther and carried more weapons. And this part I have and I appreciate that later on, Jin says only some women will qualify for these tasks, but I think you have still more suggestions. Because, my first thought was I'm a woman, and I am not light. I am going to be not useful in this regard at all. And there are going to be plenty of other women that are not going to be useful in this regard either. What else we got? But it turns out that there are all kinds of things. Herbalists and dressmakers made excellent nurses and field surgeons. Herbal remedies were effective at dulling pain, and sewing silk and lace trained steady fingers for stitching wounds. Cosmeticians and weavers improved battlefield camouflage, and entertainers and dancers devised new marching songs and battle hymns that would raise morale and spread the message of Kuni's vision. Adding women meant more hands to repair and maintain armor, more fingers trained as bowyers and fletchers, more bodies and minds to take up the endless tasks that needed to be done in an army. I really enjoyed this, and I like the fact, too, that because so many women are being involved, it also means that there's numbers there, which leads to them being able to protect each other. Because if you're only involving a couple of women, they are going to be in danger being amongst a huge group of men. That's just a fact. Men are not to be trusted. I'm sorry. # not sorry. But these women, because they're being involved in such numbers, are able to look out for one another and probably to create areas that it's safe to sleep together and not, be at the mercy of some of these soldiers who are, they are being, in the story right now, sort of treated as that they are inherently better human beings than than the men of other armies. But men are men. Whether or not they follow Kuni, who is himself a good person, is not indicative of how they're going to treat a woman who is vulnerable. I liked this part that there are so many of them getting involved. Slowly but surely, jokes about Marshal Mazzati became affectionate rather than dismissive. When officers saluted her, there was now real respect in their eyes. So then we have Kogo. Chapter 42, The Dandelion Ripens. Dasu, the 6th month of the 2nd year of the Principate. So it's been a minute, a year and a half here now. Now that it had been a year since Kunigaru had come to Dasu, Kogo was finally beginning to see the fruits of his efforts at attracting men and women of talent to the island. So this begins to attract a lot of different people, and we get several examples, and I feel like these examples are told to us specifically because they're going to all be specifically useful later. And I'm going to talk about each of them. I don't have that much time left, but this is the last chapter. So, a method for converting base lead into gold, an alchemist with white hair and a beard that hung to the ground proclaimed. But I'll need a great deal of funding to build a laboratory. Kogo nodded and politely invited the alchemist to stay in Dasu and raise money from private sources. So, first of all, obviously, we all know that converting lead into gold is impossible. That's not something that you can do. I don't know that that's true in this universe because there are also gods and magic, but I think it's probably still not possible. However, an alchemist is basically a chemist, and that doesn't mean that this person isn't going to come up with something else super valuable in, figuring out weapons, for example, potentially. Then we have a mixture of potent herbs that will soften stones so that they crumble at the touch, an old woman from Fasa explained. I've been putting on magic shows with it for years. Have you tried to approach miners with this? Asked Kogo. The old woman nodded. The mine owners tell me they're not interested since they can find plenty of men willing to break their backs wielding the pickaxe and hammer. Not to mention firework powder, said Kogo. But firework powder requires saltpeter, the supply of which is limited, not to mention that firework powder is extremely dangerous. I know there's potential in this if developed properly. Kogo wasn't sure what potential she was thinking of, but at least it didn't sound completely useless. We would be honored to have you stay with us as the king's guest. So I feel like that's something that is going to turn out to be like super duper important later. We'll see, but like being able to fucking crumble away stone with herbs, that seems like a pretty big deal, and I don't doubt that if she got together with the alchemist, they could figure some shit out. A method for extracting energy from volcanic heat, a middle-aged man with only one arm said. I have a prototype that draws on the heat of the earth to boil water, and the resulting steam can be directed to turn a wheel. Kogo wasn't sure how this could be useful, but it seemed interesting. He politely invited the man to stay and day and build a prototype for demonstration. Kogo doesn't know how this could be useful because Kogo doesn't have the knowledge that we have now, but holy shit, that's super duper important. That's a basically like bottomless well of production energy for like a factory of some kind. That's huge. So thank God Kogo is willing to just let people do stuff and not dismiss it because he has no vision. Doesn't have the vision to really think of what it could mean, but he has the understanding that this person seems to know what they're talking about. And I feel like even though I can't quite put like real clear lines on what that could be used for, there's a vague part of me that knows eventually something could be. And I'm just going to let him like simmer over there. Thank you, Kogo. You're great. A treatise on the relationship of the gods to mankind and how the proper model for the state may be derived from the pattern of rivers and winds. A young scholar with eyes full of zeal declared, I will require the king's undivided attention. Kogo's eyes glazed over as he unrolled the manuscript scroll. The raised logograms were elaborate and painted in color, and the Zindari letters were as dense as flies on honey. He rolled up the manuscript carefully and offered the man a free meal. King Kuni is somewhat preoccupied with lesser matters, he said, but I have a feeling that the hegemon would be extremely appreciative of such a work. I can write you a letter of introduction. So I like this, that he's just basically like, yeah, you are not for Kuni, but I can send you off to deal with that fucking nut job because you clearly have the same crazy in your eyes, which, you know what? I really want to know if that turns into anything. Luanzia comes to Dasu and wants to work for Kuni. And Kogo is like, all right, well, let's introduce you to the marshal first and see how this works. Luan, I think, is into her. I think Luan has a tiny bit of a crush. And I have a feeling that she sort of like is interested in him as well. She's got a vibe to her in the way that she thinks about him. That is just sort of, there's more respect there immediately than she tends to have, I think. He showed Jin some plans he had devised for constructing siege machinery with more portable components for ease of assembly and transportation. Jin immediately pointed out their flaws. Luan might be intelligent, but designing machines on paper was very different from making them really useful in the field. Luan looked dejected, sorry. Well, Jin said gruffly, the basic ideas are not bad. I can probably help you make them work. Then Kogo took Luan to see some of the more interesting inventions he had saved for Kuni to evaluate, and Luan grew excited also and discussed their virtues with Kogo. Evenings they all three stayed up late conversing, drinking, and singing. Their laughter and voices were harmonious. I just really like it. It's so, they were like three spirits, three dancing pillars that held up the roof of the palace. Yeah, I'm just kind of keeping my eye on that because I feel like Luan and Jin are going to be a thing. Lord Geru, in 1,000 years, how do you think people will remember Emperor Mapidere? Coming from someone else, it would have been an invitation to repeat the universal condemnation of a tyrant. But Luanzia was not an ordinary man. I've changed my mind many times on this question, Kuni admitted. It's easy to say that he was a tyrant who did nothing good, but it would also be untrue. I was a provincial boy, and yet I got to see some of the wonders of all the old Tiro states because of his forceful resettlement of people all across Dara. So he basically goes on and talks about, like, the various things that were terrible and admittedly terrible, but there were some things that he did properly and correctly. And that really what it comes down to is that he began to focus on the wrong things. That he like just started to put all of his energy into sort of prolonging his, what's the word I want? Like the image of him being immortal, and this like this like mythology, like he was trying to build a mythology in his own time around himself, propaganda basically, and that was the stuff that he started to get like really distracted by and more concerned about than people actually being like, helped by it. But the idea behind it, the unification of everyone and the spreading of knowledge and understanding, that was admirable and does have its advantages. He just didn't do it well, and he didn't engender the faith of the people behind him as he did it, which was a big mistake. Had he focused more on effort on administration and lasting institutions rather than megalomaniacal, God, that word, engineering projects, it's possible that the empire would have survived more than 2 generations. So, yeah, he's just basically like, I just feel like there were some things that he really had the right idea about, but he just got distracted by the wrong shit and focused on the wrong shit and just he wound up becoming a tyrant, because he sailed off into the wrong direction. He just veered right out and into space. So it ends up, there's this moment, and I really, really like this. So there's a song that Luan sings. When Han falls, the people suffer. When Han rises, the people suffer. When Han is poor, the people are poor. When Han is rich, the people are poor. When Han is strong, the people die. When Han is weak, the people die. Whatever the nobles and kings say they believe in, they always treat the people as mere stones on the Koopa board, Kuni said. There was no irony in his speech. In his heart, he still thought of himself as a commoner, a man who had nothing to his name and had to beg his friends for a place to sleep. I love that. I really believe if I ever become wildly successful and don't have to worry about money anymore, I will never be able to shake the anxiety about it that I have now. There are some things I don't think you ever really get away from if you were raised a certain way. And the fact that Kuni still feels this way, and that he still doubts himself enough to accept the help and guidance of other people, is what makes him a good leader. That's just... And I'm not getting into the politics of our present day, but we could use a few more people that come from the same circumstances as most of our country, because we have a literal president who has never gone grocery shopping and does not know how that works. I mean, that's just... I can't believe that exists. I can't believe there is a person out there who doesn't know how to grocery shop or how that goes, but that is who he is, and that's just mind-boggling to me. So anyway, yeah. I went to the ruins of my ancestral estate and prayed to the soul of my departed father. As the moon rose, I saw the light illuminate an ancient quote from the Anno Classics carved into one of the broken lintels. All life is an experiment. I understood then that I had been lacking in my vision. I thought my duty was to restore Han, but Han is not King Kosugi or the burned-down palace or the ruins of the great estates or the dead nobles and their descendants pining for glory. These are but parts of an experiment at a way of life for the people of Han and her true essence. When the experiment has proven to be a failure, one must be willing to try new paths and ways of doing things. For Mata Zindu, there is no law but the use of force, and no higher ideal than martial glory. The world he created is a mirror of his mind. When King Thufi died mysteriously, which that's news to me, on the way to Ekofi, rumor had it that his last words were, "I should have remained a shepherd." I was like, oh, Thufi, of course you're dead. Like, I feel bad for Thufi. He fucking did his best. and he wasn't a stupid person. I actually enjoyed him. He was impatient, but at times that was completely justified. And he just really tried so hard to like be diplomatic. And he, when you're working with Mata, so he finally says, Lord Garou, will you complete the dream of Emperor Mapidere but avoid his mistakes? Can you unite the islands of Dara under one crown and bring about lasting peace while lessening the burden of the people? Lady Rosanna had quietly appeared out of the dark night to join them by the fire. Noiselessly, she sat by Kuni and put her hand on his shoulder. Her hands flickered in the firelight, and Kuni again felt a clarity of mind and a willingness to speak difficult truths. I don't know how to answer you, Luan. I've always told myself I loved the people, but how can I speak of love when I can't even raise my own children? I've always told myself I'm a compassionate lord, but how can I speak of compassion when I've killed so many and betrayed so many others? I cannot say that I am a good man, only that I am a man who tried to do good. I like to believe that the people will remember me fondly, but I also know that the legacies of men cannot be foreseen during their lifetimes. I do not know if I am a man who will complete the task you dream of, because that's a question that must be asked of our descendants in 1,000 years. And Luan's basically like, see? That's a good answer. This seems like you are the right person. And it ends with the three of them sat quietly around the fire until the flame burned itself out and dawn arrived. And that is the end of the chapter. So yeah, Kuni, you're the MVP, buddy. I wish Mata wasn't so insane because I know that you guys loved each other. Mata, can't you just calm yourself? Can't you just be cool, man? Ugh. No, he can't. The answer is no. So yeah, I'm going to wrap this up. But thank you very much, Kyle, for commissioning this. This was a lot of fun. And I'm excited to continue to read. And I will see you all soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.